All right.
Let's
Let me
do
know
it.
if you are having trouble hearing me, but welcome. Welcome to our panel, Proven Persuasion, How to Apply Deep Canvassing for the Win in 2020 and beyond. Thank you for introducing yourselves in chat. My name is Steve DeLine. I am with an organization called the New Conversation Initiative. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am an organizer who's been doing work around deep canvassing for about the last 11 years. I'm part of the team that created deep canvassing within the LGBTQ rights movement. And I started out in this work as a very, very terrified gay volunteer going to the door to talk to anti-gay voters, which was a big experiment and was about the last thing that I wanted to do in the world. And I almost turned on the car and drove home on my way to my first canvass. But the experience of getting to be in front of another human being and kind of discover their humanity and dispel their fears about who I was, and to discover their humanity and have my fears about who they were dispelled, was the most healing, empowering, transformative thing for both of us that I'd ever encountered. And I've really been hooked on this work ever since, and helping organizations and campaigns in a variety of movements apply deep canvassing to their own struggles and work and to our collective fights. So and I will pass it over to Ella, my colleague.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. So yes, my name is Ella Barrett, and I've been organizing for about the last 15 years and deep canvassing for the last 11, same as Steve. And I grew up in the kind of the woods of Oregon with a family of healers and therapists and social workers. And I had the like brilliant, thankful experience of being chosen and like plucked out of the freshman class my first year at the University of Oregon, and developed into this like beautiful leadership ladder, being able to organize students around student activism and need-based aid. And then I studied social work. So I was getting this amazing experience of learning how to, you know, motivational interviewing and ways to counsel and heal, you know, past traumas in my classroom work, but there felt like there was really something missing in the organizing that I was doing. And when I went to the Los Angeles LGBT Center, it was like deep canvassing was the perfect marriage of these worlds of like healing conversations and incredible work to win elections. So that has been my passion ever since, is like how do we have less transactional voter contact conversations that actually heal? And so Murdad Azuman, our incredible coworker at People's Action, was supposed to be with us today, but he had to step out last minute. So Steve thankfully stepped in. So we're happy to have Steve here. And we're going to get started into our agenda for today. So our plan for today is to talk a little bit about what is deep canvassing, talk about some new incredible research that we have that has direct implications for our work in 2020, and then talking about how you all can apply that learning to your own scripts and your own programs. And we love questions. We're going to have 3 different areas and times to answer questions from the Q&A. So please drop those in the Q&A box and we will address them as we go. Awesome. So starting in with what is deep canvassing. Deep canvassing is a methodology that is 11 years in development and was created by an incredible group of organizers and volunteers at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And it is one of the only tactics that have been proven to change voters' minds in a lasting way and on really tough issues, and uproot underlying prejudice and racism and homophobia that voters hold. And we also want to be clear that this work is also effective on the phones. When we say canvassing, we also mean phone canvassing. So the project that Steve is going to report on momentarily was done entirely over the phones. So that is possible too during a pandemic, during our pandemic world. And we want to give you a snapshot of what this work looks like. So before we talk more about it, we want to give you an opportunity to see it. So we're going to show you a marriage equality conversation from 2010. And this was right after we had lost Proposition 8 here in California. And a canvasser named Jackson is going to have a conversation with a voter named Clint. And it's a 2-minute, 30-second edit of a much longer conversation. And while you watch this video, I would love for you to think about, what do you notice about this deep canvas thing that may be different from a traditional canvas, and what is Jackson doing in the conversation that is working? And feel free to type it in chat, but after the video, I'm also gonna see if we can get a couple folks off mute to share their reflections verbally.
Okay, what would you say, like, we're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2008? Okay.
Prop 8?
Yeah, and do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote, okay. What would you say, like, is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin who's lesbian that I love very much. And she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow, that's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill, okay. So it seems like Jill would be real happy, right, if she could get married.
They'd like to, especially they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, it's helpful.
And I believe that stuff, see, I get emotional about this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really hard decision.
Well, when it comes to health issues and stuff.
What? Just curious, why does it, make you feel so emotional?
Because right now they can't do things for each other.
Yeah. That's gotta be really hard. I see how much you love and care for them, and for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, you taught me, and when you bring that stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins, as much as I love them and stuff. I don't know that I take it in internally as much.
Yeah. That's
like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I? And now, because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me.
Sure. We're going to be voting on this again in the future. What do you think would be the right thing to do?
I would vote for gays to be able to legally get married. And why does that feel right to you? Because I think if two people love each other, they loved each other, the ones who are couples. Yeah. And I respect that.
Woohoo! All right, let's give it up for Jackson and Clint. Awesome. So we're gonna give this a try. This is a Netroots online experiment. Do folks have the ability to raise their hand? If you would love, I would love for a couple people to verbally respond. Does anyone want to raise their hand and come off mute? Susan, our incredible room host, is going to see if she has the ability to help people come off mute. Are folks able to raise their hands? Awesome. So we have Sarah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Sarah.
Hi. So what really stood out to me was taking something that on the surface, was this very larger than life issue that the person really, initially didn't feel applied to them because it was sort of like an us versus them thing, and making it personal. So taking that down a level and saying like, how does this affect you and your immediate life? And I think that's so incredibly powerful when we're able to kind of break down issues that are, on the surface level seeming like these super large issues, or maybe something that like you don't, personally face, and really breaking down how it does affect everyone. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, yeah, just when, I mean, you're so spot on. Just one follow-up question. What did you notice Jackson doing in that conversation to make it personal for Clint?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me was just one, not initially getting defensive when the person was like, "I didn't vote," which sounds like it's not related, but it really is. Just being in a safe space for that person to have a conversation. And then also just sort of asking guided, small guided questions to let the person arrive at their own conclusion instead of trying to, you know, force a script or force some sort of outcome, just sort of leading that person to discover their own kind of truth, if you will.
Yes. Yes, you got it. Nailed it. Deep canvassing is, I mean, the entire methodology is about, the only way to sort of move a voter along sort of the spectrum of support is to hold non-judgmental space for them and allow them to really process and walk through something that maybe they didn't, as you said, didn't think was really related to their life or wasn't personal to them, or voting in fear of something changing that we were able to figure out by Jackson asking those questions, that Clint really did have a personal stake in this. Thank you so much, Sarah. Is there anyone else want a hand raise and chat? Yeah, let's go with Christine. What did you notice, Christine?
All right, hi. This
Hi.
might be really small, but the organizer used the names that like the person said. And so it made it really personal, and then was really curious. Like, if you don't mind me asking, why do you feel so emotional? And what I have found is, like, if people are uncomfortable, they'll just tell you they're uncomfortable, and they won't go deep. But if you don't ask, you don't give people the opportunity to kind of voice it. So that's what I noticed.
Yeah. Yes. So huge. And Christine, what kind of impact, like asking that, like, what was Jill's name, or what was her name? What was the niece's name? I can't remember exactly what he said. And then asking, why does that feel so emotional? What kind of impact do you feel like that had on Clint, or sort of his evolution in support?
That was the way they like personalized it, right? Like, it wasn't just my cousin or my friend. It was, and I don't remember the name, Jill. I don't know. I think it was
Jill.
Like Jill. Yeah. And so I think that's just the way that it got personalized and quickly, was because when you name something, you're really thinking about that specific person, not just your arbitrary cousin.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about that on an it's not just like, I have a cousin who's lesbian, and then moving on, right? Like that may have had a slight impact, but was that going to be a memorable, lasting change type interaction for Clint? Probably not. Like being able to get to that emotional core of what that's like for Clint, really, sort of made that interaction so much deeper. And Jim Dixon in chat is saying, listening before asking. Yes, like I don't know if y'all saw Jackson's posture was very like sitting back and sort of holding space. There was some silence at different points. Jackson felt like he was holding space in a therapeutic sense, reflecting, summarizing, validating. Yeah, so as I talked about, like my background in social work, often I joke about deep canvassing as like political social work, that we're sort of offering political therapy and really helping people work through their conflicts. I also found it important, Kyle said, I also found it important, the most of the conversation wasn't about the ask. Yes. Yeah. So there was an ask at the beginning and an end, but it wasn't, hammering home that I am only here to get your support on the next marriage equality vote. That's great. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Christine. We're going to head back into screen share mode. Awesome. So next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about why deep canvassing works so well and why it has been something that is so impactful on so many different issues. And as we saw in this conversation, what we found with deep canvassing is that the end of the day, whether or not you are mobilizing someone to vote, whether someone is deciding who they're going to vote for, how they're going to vote, that actually happens on a deeply emotional emotional level. So with conflicted voters, it's not actually a battle of facts or ideas or opinions. It's really a battle of emotions. And so in order to reach people, in order to move people, we must reach them at a deeply emotional level. And what is most emotional for voters is their real lived experience. So as we saw in that conversation, Clint being able to talk about Jill just made this conversation so much more personal and made this issue grounded in reality and, you know, an emotional place for Clint. And in a deep canvas, we are really focusing on conflicted voters, and conflicted voters have conflicted feelings. They often have, you know, fear, underlying racism or white supremacy, like cynicism, scarcity, and hopelessness, that our opposition and the right are so effective at, you know, using race baiting and fear mongering to stoke. It like stokes that fight or flight place in our brain. But on the other hand, our emotional stories and our real lived experiences are often connected to compassion and connection and hope and care. And this creates cognitive dissonance for a voter. So our goal in a deep canvas conversation is to elicit the voter's story, which helps us resolve those conflicted feelings towards compassion, connection, hope, and care. And in order to do this, we have to structure our trainings and our scripts in a very specific way. So in a traditional canvas, often our main goal is to get that ID, you know, like a yes, no, maybe. And in a deep canvas script, our goal is to surface complexity, to surface their honest opinion about an issue. And we use a 0 to 10 scale to do so. And in a traditional canvas, our goal is usually to train canvassers to stick to the script and use that structure. And in a deep canvas, it's a lot more fluid. And our goal as trainers and organizers is to train our canvassers to listen and ask really open-ended questions. In a traditional canvas, often we learn from our consultants and folks on high the exact, you know, message we have to deliver. And in a deep canvas, our goal is for both the canvasser, and you didn't see this in Jackson and Clint because it's a short edit, but typically the canvasser and the voter exchange vulnerable stories, and is, you know, all about that personal experience rather than the talking points. So yeah, that was what is deep canvassing. Wondering, I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but yeah, any folks can raise their hands or ask in the chat. Any sort of questions we could answer about deep canvassing as a whole before we dig into the 2020 research. Yeah, I'm curious what we found successful for fostering these conversations on the phone. That's a great question. It's actually, I found that it's not that different. Your rapport building, a big part of deep canvassing is like building rapport at the beginning of the conversation. And often we train canvassers to like smile and, you know, comment on their dog, or, you know, that you like their shirt. And we found that on the phone, you really have to build rapport with your tone and with like sharing something personal about you very quick in the conversation, so that folks, so that voters feel like, oh, this is different than a normal political conversation. So that's a little bit different, but I would say the rest of it, I've been shocked to find that we actually don't have to adapt to the script much at all to the phone. That people, especially during this pandemic, are really willing to have these longer, more vulnerable conversations. Other questions? Folks can raise their hand or type in the chat. Oh, we have one in the Q&A. Yes, yeah. If you, Jesleen, we have our, I can tap my email into the chat. So Jesleen is asking, I have a question about, not about deep canvassing, but would we be able to get the slide deck? And yeah, we would be happy to send you all of our materials. We are like open source, want as many folks to be doing this work as possible. So I'll type my email into the chat.
And Jim in the chat was also asking, is there a good source for training people along the same lines? And Jim, I would say our goal is to get as many deep canvas programs and offer as much information as we can, so we can also share materials, training materials that have been used in past situations or currently. But I would say another great thing to do is to join up with a deep canvas program that's underway somewhere and go through their training process and just, you know, experience that to also ground you as if you're looking to train others. So we can also we'll share our contact info and can share some opportunities with different programs to do that right now that are running deep canvas efforts over Zoom. So you can join from anywhere.
Cool. All right, let's keep moving.
All right. So in terms of 2020, just to be clear, right now, deep canvassing is being used to do persuasion on a lot of different issue-based campaigns. But in terms of the 2020 cycle, the candidate cycle, it's being used in two crucial ways. It's being used to persuade conflicted voters and to motivate reluctant voters in our base to vote in the first place. But the most recent news that we are going to focus on today is about deep canvassing for persuasion in the presidential election. So that's not to say it's the only thing it can be used for. Both tactics are important and are happening, but we're going to focus on a persuasion experiment. And to be clear, for the context around the research here, deep canvassing has been proven to have a powerful persuasive impact on a whole variety of social issues over the last 10 years. So in a series of randomized controlled trials that we've been able to conduct with different teams over the last 6 years or so, we've been able to create huge changes in support margin on some of the toughest issues out there, from trans rights to abortion to immigration. So some of our communities' most challenging issues where we need to move voters, you know, in order to reach for liberation, like we've been able to move voters by really significant margins. We've seen changes of anywhere from like 8 to 20% in support margin as a result of deep canvas campaigns. So far greater than the margin by which we win or lose most issue campaigns. And what's more is that the impacts of those conversations have been shown to last for as long as the researchers studying them were able to keep measuring. So 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, these persuasive impacts have been shown to stick and endure. But this past March, the New Conversation Initiative, our team worked with People's Action and 6 of its member organizations in battleground states to run the first ever experiment of whether deep canvassing can also persuade people in a candidate race. So specifically whether deep canvas conversations over the phone that also incorporate race class narrative messaging. So we worked heavily with Anat Shanker-Osario to incorporate race class narrative work into the script. So can conversations over the phone persuade people to vote for Biden instead of Trump? For this project, we were focused on calling likely Trump voters in battleground states. So this universe veered older and whiter for sure. And the breaking news is that we found that we are able to make an impact. We are succeeding in moving voters away from Trump and towards Biden instead. We are persuading people on the presidential election. So researchers David Brockman and Josh Callum just measured the impact of these conversations, and they found that we are having a 3.2 percentage point impact on Trump's vote margin as a result of these conversations with the whole larger universe of folks that we are reaching out to. So to put that in context, a 3.2% impact on vote margin is larger than Trump's margin of victory in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and North Carolina and Florida in 2016. So this is a really significant movement outcome. And according to the Analyst Institute's recent meta-analysis of lots of different persuasion experiments, right? So they measured what are we seeing in terms of our attempts to persuade people on a whole variety of different kinds of elections. Over here on the left, you see the average impact of attempts by our side to measure people, to persuade people in a presidential race. So the average impact of our attempts to persuade people in a presidential race have about a 0.1% impact on vote margin. And what we are seeing as a result of these conversations is more up here, is like a 3.2% impact on vote margin. So this is like 32 times the impact, 32 times more powerful than the average attempt to persuade in a presidential race. And in terms of duration of impact, we don't have clear results on that yet, because the researchers are going to continue studying a month from now further to see how long this impact holds. So we don't yet know if it holds for a month, but the voters in this study were surveyed on average about 6 days after receiving one of our calls, which is already a really exciting and promising duration of impact for them to still be moved 6 days later. Most impacts in terms of persuasion work dissipate within 2 to 3 days. And the other exciting result is that 3.2% impact is kind of our overall change in vote margin, but there is likely room to grow the impact on vote margin even more through what we've learned through the results about who is moving and who to target. So in terms of who's being impacted, independent voters, not surprisingly, are moving in really significant numbers, and also women are moving in the greatest numbers as compared to men. So if we look at just the subset of independent women within the universe of folks, we're having more like an 8 to 9% impact on vote margin among independent women, which opens up a huge avenue to do persuasion work with a more targeted universe. So those are the findings of the research. We'll take questions in a minute. I'm going to hand it over to Ella to share some more specifics of the exact script that we developed for this experiment.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. So I'm going to move really quickly through this script, but again, just for time's sake, but again, if folks have specific questions about a part of a script or why something looks a certain way, would love to answer in the Q&A and also come back to a certain slide. But yes, please let us know if you would like access to the script as well. So every single Deep Canvas script has the exact same 6-step structure, and this script is exactly like that. So the big sort of main question that we are helping voters answer with this script is, what kind of leader do we need in this crisis, and who is going to help better represent my needs and experiences and understand my needs and experiences in this moment. So we start with our step 1, our intro and first rating. And our goal here is to have these voters answer on a 1 to 10 scale. So when you think about your upcoming vote for president, if you can imagine on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is definitely voting for Trump, 10 is definitely voting for Biden, and 5 is somewhere in the middle, you have mixed feelings, where would you put yourself at this point? And what we find is that we're really looking for those folks from like a 2 to a 9. And what this scale provides is us to understand the shades of gray and get a real honest read about where this voter's conflict lies, what pulls them towards Biden, what pulls them away from Biden. So we want to actually hear the thing that we normally don't, which is how folks are, being pulled away from us, or what is keeping them from fully being a 10 and supporting Biden. And step 2 is where we step entirely out of opinion and entirely into story. So we leave all of the opinions, all of the conflicts about Biden up at the top of the script, and we step into eliciting the voter's story. So the goal of step 2 and 3 is to share our personal story and elicit the voter's personal story. And in this Trump versus Biden script, we found it incredibly helpful to elicit care stories. So is anyone taking care of you? Are you taking care of anyone at this time? And what we found is that it really helps us ground the voter in the value of care and compassion at this moment. and helps us be able to make the case that we really need, like, we have hope that our country can come together, but we really need a leader who has more care and compassion, and that is not Donald Trump. Even conflicted voters can agree with that. And then we move into step 3, and this is where we are sharing our personal stake story. So, you know, even though Biden is very imperfect and was not our first choice, why I have, you know, what I have sort of developed in myself is the reason why I am able to vote for Biden and why this election is so important to me. And then with our voters, we are eliciting healthcare and making ends meet stories. And our goal here is to understand how that voter is struggling with healthcare and making ends meet, and so that we can help them see that, you know, these are things that as working people we all struggle with, and Biden actually understands that experience and actually has a plan where Donald Trump does not. And step 4, I want to put like blazing lights around this part of the script. Step 4 is one of the most unique pieces besides eliciting a voter's story. Step 4 is one of the most unique parts of a deep canvas script. And this is where we train our canvassers to pause and hold non-judgmental space for the voter to process their conflict with Biden. So this is, you know, a counseling technique. Our entire goal is to hold up a mirror to the voter after the story sharing and say, you know, bring back some of those concerns from the beginning of the script and say, on the one hand, you know, I really heard you express concern about Biden's age and his mental faculties. But on the other hand, you know, I've heard you say that you really do believe that he does have more care and empathy and understand that, you know, he's been through a lot with his own loss with his family. Perhaps you have some mixed feelings. You know, what's on your mind now after we've been, you know, talking for a while? And our goal here is to be super non-judgmental and just help folks process. And then step 5, woo-wee, this has been a journey to create this part of the script, making the authentic case for Biden that feels both credible to the voter and like authentic to a canvasser is tough. So we found that using the race class narrative messaging to really help inoculate against all of the race baiting and fear messaging around immigrants and protesters in China, saying that like it is, you know, Trump is trying to divide us, and these, you know, immigrants and protesters in China are not what to blame. Like really what's to blame is folks in power who are prioritizing the rich and big corporations. And then what we found is that we really do have to make the case for Biden, and talking about his upbringing and his working class background is incredibly effective for this demographic of voter. And then in step 5, or step 6, sorry, we have our final rating. So after we have, you know, done the story share, after we have processed concerns, after we have made our own case for why Biden is the right pick in this moment, we ask on the same sort of 1 to 10 scale, the exact same question, and allow voters to reassess themselves at the end. And that is our Biden versus Trump script. So any questions about the research, any questions about the script? Again, please let me know if you would like access to it. Steve, have you been tracking any questions?
Yep. I think we're good. Perla, I'm so sorry you're struggling on the Zoom front, but I hope we're helping. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand too, and we can just have folks speak. Just want to pause for a minute.
There, we just dumped a lot of information out there. So
yeah.
wants to not just be bulldozing our way through.
Yeah, trying to pack as much into a 50-minute time period as possible. And thank you, Susan, for helping Perla. Zoom world. So Karen asked, you mentioned deep canvassing is working over the phone, but I'm curious how you get people to talk on the phone in the first place, or even answer the phone to a stranger. Yeah, Steve, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that when we first started getting back on the phones as COVID was really, and so in this work with People's Action and their 6 teams in different battleground states, we've been on the phones in a bunch of different areas. And as we were first getting back on the phones, we were getting like a 6% contact rate. So in terms of how often the people on our list were picking up, we were seeing that happen about 6% of the time. The researchers we're working with were able to kind of look at some of our results in terms of who was picking up the phone and develop a little bit of a contact model to predict who would be more likely to pick up, which was able to get us to a contact and pickup rate of more like 15%. So we've been ecstatic about that. That feels like a great pickup and contact rate. So that's what we can do on kind of the data and back end, but still 15%, you know, there are a lot of folks that aren't going to pick up. There are a lot of folks that aren't going to talk to a stranger. So it's really just a matter of there are many folks out there who are going to and finding them and targeting them. And I would say just having a script that focuses on building rapport and being curious. So right from the get-go, like every time we get someone on the phone, it's a precious opportunity, and really building in our scripts, getting to a question and getting to talking about something personal as quickly as possible, rather than having a long chunk of, here's my organization, and here's our message, and here is you know my message for you, which I have written so many phone scripts that start out that way, and it always comes back to being a mistake. So really keeping ourselves as quick as possible, getting to questions to, hey, this is what I'm curious about you, voter, and something personal that we're sharing as a caller has really been our key to success in getting lots more people on the phone. And Jasleen has a question around.
Oh,
sorry,
can
go ahead,
we?
Ella.
Sorry, add one more. Yeah, can you go to the slide, the intro slide?
Yep, sure.
So I just want to, I think everything that Steve said is exactly right. And I just want to bring folks home to what we have found helpful is starting with a COVID care check-in. And this can feel manipulative because we are trying to have a conversation about politics. But what we found is being super authentic and like asking, you know, how are you doing with everything going on? Are you worried about COVID in your area? And then sharing a little bit about how we have been impacted has been really helpful. And what I want to say is, if someone is not doing well, or if someone is in crisis, what we've trained our canvassers to do is have resources on hand and not go into the political conversation. So it's sort of like we've melded like a COVID care check-in script with sort of our political work. And I think that has really helped us build rapport. And I thought we would have a huge drop-off rate from, you know, doing the COVID care check-in to the political question, but we don't. Like I've been surprised at how much people are able to just be like, okay, you were checking in on me, thanks, and now we're talking about politics.
Great. Jasleen was also asking in Q&A, when making the case for Biden, what does that look like that still remains gentle? I'm so used to going hard because of limited time and stress. Totally hear you on this, Jasleen. And I would say the key we've learned is that focusing like first on building a rapport with folks and sharing emotional stories, like doing that work of the deep canvas script really puts us in a different place in terms of rapport and trust with the voters. And then using I statements, right? So it's speaking from a place of like, so, you know, here's my personal stake in this election, and here is why I believe Biden is, you know, is the right candidate that's going to be better for our lives and gives me hope moving forward, and it's going to solve the problems that I'm really grappling with as a human being right now. Really focusing on that, making the case for what we believe, what we've experienced, rather than saying this is the ultimate truth, gives us the room to be really assertive about what we believe and what we think the truth is, without making it feel like we're trying to tell the voter what to think. Ella, what would you add?
I would just add that I think it's a practice in tone, and that, you know, being able to role play and if you know this is something that you struggle with or other callers struggle with as well, we sort of have to unlearn some of the transactional like ways that we have deep canvassed in the past. And you know, so role playing with someone to make sure that you are using like a tone that's more like, yeah, you know, it's so interesting that you said that. And you know, I believe in this election, like it's really about how we come together and care for each other, and like pausing and allowing space for the voter to respond if the voter is going to respond. And, you know, when I see Biden, I really do see a leader who will listen and, you know, build a great team and take responsibility and find solutions that will work for all of us, not just a wealthy few. And breathe and pause and allow space for the voter to answer. And that we sort of, like I said, just have to retrain our brain. Because if we sound like it matters, but it's not like the end of the, like you have to vote for it, like Biden is the only choice. It's like, it allows conflicted voters to be a little bit more open with us.
Absolutely. We do have to move on in a minute, but I quickly want to hit Joshua's question. Joshua's asking, my impression is that deep canvassing is yet to be effective on climate because it has become a partisan issue, but Trump versus Biden is hyper partisan. How is this working when climate has struggled? And I would say that in our experience, like almost all of our experience, creating and working on deep canvassing has been on issues that have been made hyper-partisan, right? That have been used as wedge issues between the right and the left. So our experience is that partisanship has always been part of the picture. Climate, though, definitely even more so, and that's been a challenge in some of the early climate projects. Lots more to say to answer like how to navigate that, but I will just say that we are currently working with some projects. One project in the past that we worked with in Montana, and then a current project that the Eco Society in Canada is leading that is making some real progress on the climate front and kind of how to navigate that with partisanship. So Joshua, if you're particularly have that on your mind, we would feel free to email, and I would love to share more brain space about that because we are finding ways through it. But with that, we should move on because we don't want to finish this out with offering a few more practical tips that may be applicable in our work this cycle.
Ooh. Thanks, Steve. So let's go. We're going to do 3 hot tips. And I've gone over a couple of these, so hopefully we can do this quickly. Let's go to tip number 1. So if you are writing presidential persuasion scripts, the Trump versus Biden script, just want to emphasize that we must talk about Biden. All of the polling and research has shown that folks' views on Trump are very fixed. Like they see him in the news all the time. They know what they love about him. They know what they dislike about him. But voters' views on Biden are incredibly malleable. They do. And Steve, can you mute for a second? Sorry. So voters' views on Biden are incredibly malleable. People don't know a lot about him. So in order to have a lasting change and impact on voters voting for Biden, we have to talk about who he is. And what we have found that I said earlier is that talking about Biden's working class upbringing versus Trump's upbringing as someone who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, being able to say, you know, like, I think Biden is someone who understands our experience as working people and understands our struggle. Like, do you think Trump understands our struggle? And voters are like, nope. Like, that's pretty clear. And I would say that, you know, talking about Biden as working class actually is way more impactful than talking about Biden's political history or background or his wins in the past as vice president, which can actually shut voters down. So talking about Biden's working class upbringing, add that to your scripts. The next piece that we've learned is that it's incredibly important because Biden is, you know, not perfect and it was not our first choice. We need to create intentional space for canvassers to process. And canvassers, volunteers, organizers, like I had to do it for myself to process our own conflicted feelings about Biden. Not that we're going to resolve them, but resolve, you know, like how do I talk about him in an authentic way that doesn't feel like I'm lying? And we have actually developed a script for this. So if you would like access to that Biden processing, like internal processing script, let us know. And we've also found that with younger voters and our canvassers, that being able to talk about as Biden as someone that we can hold accountable, and that we're sort of electing our opposition and someone that we are going to hold accountable for the next 4 years, has really worked as a talking point.
Get off mute, Steve. Great. So the other thing that I would, hot tip number 2 is to look for opportunities to focus your script and your canvassers on eliciting voter stories. So whether you are working to counter the effects of fear messaging and racism with conflicted voters, or you're helping people in our base overcome their disillusionment with the voting process, getting folks to process their emotions and stories is the most powerful step. I know we keep hammering this home. It's just so important. What voters say is so much more important than what we say. And we now have actual like hard evidence of this. So over a series of experiments that we've run on persuading voters around immigration, we have rigorously tested different kinds of scripts head to head against one another. And what the results of those tests have shown is that scripts that have tried to persuade with only talking points and messages have made no impact whatsoever. But when the same canvassers talked to the same voters in the same communities during the same time period, but added sharing their own stories as canvassers into the mix, they made a persuasive impact. However, that impact decayed more over time. When the same canvassers again talked to the same voters in the same communities, but really focused on eliciting voter stories in addition to sharing their own stories, they made a persuasive impact, and that impact was more lasting. So the most impactful thing we can do is train canvassers and callers to elicit voter stories. And just practically, one half of that picture is putting open-ended questions into our scripts. So questions designed to get voters talking openly and vulnerably about their own lives. Questions that don't have yes or no answers, questions that are not driving at a specific talking point, questions that are open-ended and about life experience. And then the second half of the picture is training canvassers to make the best use of those questions, which means listening and being curious about what voters say in response. And the greatest tool that we have found for this is a tool we call the cone of curiosity. So this tool helps canvassers when a voter kind of drops a hint that they have a story or an experience to talk about. It helps canvassers dig like one deep hole to get all the way down to the emotion of that experience and the details of it, rather than just letting it kind of float by on the wind unprocessed. So this tool is a reminder when we hear the hint of a story to ask follow-up questions and ask the voter to paint us the full picture of that experience, right? Who, what, when, where, why. The way you saw Jackson do in that video earlier by asking, what's your cousin's name? Tell me more about the experience she's having. And then also going a step further, once we have those details, to ask how did that feel and why? Again, the same way Jackson did in that video. He didn't just get the story about the cousin, he asked, how do you feel about that? Which is really what brought that voter's emotion to the fore in a way that was going to make a big impact in the conversation. So this is a tool that can really transform how we interact with voters.
Heck yeah, train everyone on the cone. So we have our third final tip. We would really suggest, whether or not you are mobilizing voters in your campaign or trying to persuade conflicted voters, is to add a process conflict section to your script. Because we know that in order to lastingly persuade folks, we have to do two things: elicit their story and make sure that we are processing those conflicted concerns and giving space for that. Can I go to next slide? So yeah, we must surface and discuss the conflict in order to fully resolve the conflict. So we do this in two ways. Next slide. So at the start of the script, using that 1 to 10 scale to surface the complexity and reasons that folks are not fully voting for Biden, and then to adding that, step 5, which is the processing. Can you go to next slide? Adding the processing. Adding the processing conflict and dissonance part of the script, and training voters to pause, or training canvassers to pause and be able to hold up a mirror for voters. And I think this works incredibly well in mobilization too, and volunteer recruitment. Like there are so many places that we can use this sort of processing conflict and dissonance in our scripts. And with that, we are nearing the end of our time, and just want to put up a slide with our contact information. And we also have, since Mehrdad Azuman was not able to be on the call today, we have 2 organizers of color who we love and have worked with us very deeply and who are leading their own deep canvas programs, that if you're looking for more perspective from an organizer of color on the deep canvassing work, feel free to reach out to Moss and Maria Elena as well.
Yeah. And just question-wise, if we have a couple more minutes before we get officially kicked out, Perla had a question. How effective have you seen this deep canvassing work in rural communities that are very conservative and where the presence of support for Trump is so strong? I live in a community that is 85% Latinx, and it's been harder to get that community to stand up against the structured racism our town holds. And that is like, there's a lot to say about that, Perla. I would just say that we are currently, we've been working for the last few years on persuading folks around immigration specifically, and a lot of that work has happened in rural communities that are highly conservative. So like Alamance County, North Carolina, and rural parts of Tennessee, and very conservative parts of the Central Valley here in California. So we have a lot of direct experience that we could share some lessons from. So, and currently there's an organization in, just as an example, in Fresno here in the Central Valley in California, that's predominantly a circle of young undocumented folks that are reaching out over the phone to have conversations with like very conservative voters about this issue. So we have a lot of lessons about how to approach and you know, make folks feel really strong and empowered to do that, and also how to help them carry the emotional load and pain that comes along sometimes with doing that. That can be a risk of that process. So worlds to say about that. I would just say quickly, like building, like the other half of deep canvassing, which we haven't really had the space to talk about here, is building a culture and a community around doing the work that is really strong and supportive and gives people actual deep, authentic emotional support. Like building a community of folks that can do this work together and be courageous together and support one another is what everyone who's ever done this work, it's what I've needed to do this work from the get-go, and what we found other folks need. So yeah, that's a whole nother training about how to build those structures. And I will just quickly plug the Political Healers Project is a team we've been working with recently that's shared, they're doing really amazing work around trauma-informed organizing, and they also have really helped us figure some important pieces of this out. So if you're looking for more resources, we're happy to talk to you. Mas and LM, the 2 folks on this slide, would glad to talk to you, and also check out the Political Healers Project. They're phenomenal and they're doing amazing work. And those are all resources.
Awesome. All right. Thank you everyone for coming to our session. Please, please, please reach out. Like the reason NCI exists is to help organizations and organizers develop deep canvas projects and be able to pull some lessons from deep canvas into any work you're doing. So please feel free to reach out and enjoy the rest of Netroots. I hope you all have a great next session.
Oh, and I'll also say, Caitlin asked about getting involved in some of this Trump versus Biden work specifically. That same network of folks is also going to be doing voter mobilization deep canvas work in some of the same high priority areas. So please reach out to us if you're interested in volunteering. We're starting to build a big volunteer team. That project, I don't want to say something that may or may not happen, but that project may be looking to hire folks soon. So if you're like, boy, this is for me, and you'd be interested in potentially working on a project like this, I can connect you with the folks at People's Action that are looking to build a team. So just a flag. But yes, thank you all so much for joining on a Saturday morning. Thank you for being with us, and have a great rest of your Netroots.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Susan, yes, that was wonderful. That was super helpful. Thank you, Jan. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. Glad to have had you. Oops, getting kicked out now.